Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to our event, Digital Peacebuilding and Intersectional Feminism, the launch event to our report, Sealing the Cracks. I am delighted that so many people are joining us for our discussion today. As I was told, 230 people have signed up for the event. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's really great. My name is Schmitz. I am the managing director of the Platform for Peaceful Conflict Transformation, a German network organization. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the platform and of our cooperation partner, the Berghof Foundation and Build Up today. 2 years ago, still very much under the impression of the pandemic, the platform, together with the Institute for Development and Peace, INEF, in Duisburg, commissioned and published a report by Julia Silvana Hofstetter, shedding light on the connection between digital technologies and peace building. The report, Digital Technologies, Peace Building and Civil Society, Addressing Digital Conflict Drivers and Moving the Digital Peace Building Agenda Forward, provided us with a first overview of the opportunities and challenges digital technologies create for peace builders, discussed how they alter the role of civil society, and proposed future directions for the digital peace building agenda. I will post the link in the chat afterwards. Since that report, digitalization and digital peace building have grown in importance and have become even more relevant for civil society actors in their daily efforts to promote peace. Against this background, and in view of recent developments that feminist perspectives, not only, but also in the German politics and discussion, are increasingly being heard and becoming part of the political agendas, together with the Berghof Foundation, we asked ourselves questions. How can we ensure that digital peace-building projects do not reinforce existing inequalities? How can a feminist lens to their approach and activities be ensured? And how do we need to keep in mind, or what do we need to keep in mind during their implementation? And to answer these questions, we were very luckily able to win Build Up, whose study Sealing the Cracks we were recently able to publish and which we are discussing today. We are very pleased that Mira El-Mavla, one of the co-authors of the study, will present some key findings from the report today. Mira joined Build Up in March 2020 and has since focused on social media research in conflict context, running participatory virtual consultations and managing peace innovator programs in the Swana region. Before that, she worked on political developments and service delivery projects in Lebanon that entailed facilitating communication among groups in conflicts and conducting field-focused analysis and research. Based in Beirut, she also dedicates time to intersectional queer and feminist community organizing through a small mutual aid group. We are excited to learn from Mira today about the report and how an intersectional feminist perspective delivers more impactful peace building and how it mitigates biases and harm when applied to digital technology. After Mira's presentation, we will have our panel discussion with 3 amazing experts. Who will share their experiences, perspectives, and ideas with us. Thank you so much, Harriet, Adong, Nadine, Alidib, and Jennifer Manninger for being with us today. I'm pretty sure that you are all very keen on learning more on our panelists too, but they will be introduced by my esteemed colleague, Beatrix Austin, our moderator for today, right after Mira's input. Before I hand over to Mira, I've been asked to make one last technical remark. You are all invited to raise questions. To do so, please use the Q&A function, and we will try to pick up on as many questions as possible from the audience we can do. Now I wish us all in a very exciting and insightful event. And with that, I'll turn the floor to you, Mira. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. Thanks, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. And if we could just share the presentation now, that'd be great. Thanks, Nina, and I can just let you know when the next slide should come up. Thank you for the introduction. I just wanted to say thanks again to also my colleagues at Build Up who co-authored the study. We tried to present something that could be both findings of colleagues after interviews and a literature review, and also have that feed into some directions for programming and recommendations for how this can practically affect our work. But I think that kind of more practical and action-oriented part of things, I would leave them more to the question and answer session, and also to my colleagues for their more like the input that comes from their experience. And I can just walk you through the general, like we have findings and some inputs from colleagues from the study. So if I could just have the next slide, we had a, well, I mean, I know the visual is very on point, but I couldn't really help myself. We're not only talking here about intersectional feminism as an approach or something that we can find in our work, it's also a paradigm and very much a lens through which we encourage. And actually, we can't really avoid anymore at this point. We have to be working in a way that integrates this into how we see the context that we work in. Most of you might know that the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw has coined this term. And she famously said, if we aren't intersectional, some of us, the most vulnerable, are going to fall through the cracks. So how does this encourage us to have an intersectional feminist lens, which refers to an analytical and practice-oriented perspective that makes power asymmetries and imbalances of power visible, and points to multiple and overlapping forms of oppression that are due to race, income, age, religion, ability, depending on your context, nationality, sect, confession, and varying forms as well as physical ability, etc. So we know that scholars have been looking at how an intersectional feminist perspective can deliver more impactful peace building. And we also know, or we have also explored, how intersectional feminist perspectives on digital technology can mitigate bias and potentially reduce harm. So when we did the study, we kind of tried to incorporate these two things or merge them into one another to understand how a theoretical framework can analyze the different aspects of how social and political identities can create unique but often overlapping forms of discrimination. And how can these amplify opportunities and reduce the risks for us as practitioners? So if I could have the next slide, to start to really get into how intersectional frameworks would complexify the hierarchies that we are used to seeing, the compulsory ways the ways of thinking that we have believed to be compulsory about the context that we work in, or even about the power dynamics that exist. Excuse me, when we say we're using technology for more intersectional peace building, we're actually asking, how can we use digital approaches in a way that actually considers, acknowledges, recognizes, represents experiences of all kinds of people in peace processes and programming, and even, let's just say, conflict transformation programming, especially those who face more than one type of discrimination, so layered and intersectional discrimination. Here we see 4 key paths. If we could have the next slide, please, of how, excuse me. Here we see 4 key paths of how digital technology can enhance how digital technology can be enhanced by an intersectional lens. First, building better relationships of trust. So these are, if you'd like, big headings, big insights and findings that are embedded with lots of findings from our work, and also readings and literature on the work that's been done so far and how it can be expanded using this intersectional lens. So what do we know about digital communication tools? We know that they can contribute to a sense of social cohesion, common community identity, and we know that we as peace builders can use this to build trust and cut across identities and experiences of marginalization that are not always possible offline. So digital means then can provide a platform for those who literally, we're talking about a literal platform at times, for those who might not otherwise speak up in a process, And it can also technically allow for side conversations in different ways that allow for a combination of different intersections of identities that, for whatever reason, including the barriers put up by people's identity intersections. So for some reasons, we can't imagine those interactions actually happening offline in the same way. What I meant there was, for example, physical ability, area of residence, doesn't always allow for that physical participation, and we know that and we know that digital tools can give us this leeway at certain points. We also know in general that informality breeds trust, and that offline or online ways of engaging with people can take different forms through different platforms and tools. This can also create a spectrum of formality and informality, and when we can diversify those avenues of communication, we've seen really remarkable impact in terms of programming and talking to groups of people through those tools. Excuse me. It also allows, when we want to build better relationships of trust, digital technologies can sometimes allow us to also have conversations that people might not feel safe to have in other contexts. And this can therefore enhance our efforts to focus on local or hyper-localized peace-building efforts rather than constantly turning our attention towards higher level peace-building processes. And in that vein, digital technologies can also broaden participation and ownership. They can offer new, different ways and literally increase opportunities for participation, especially for those facing overlapping forms of discrimination. So when we want to overcome barriers that we see as present in the offline space, digital messaging platforms, for example, give people access to online discussions, and these can cut through lines of class or physical mobility, as I mentioned. And then also digital means can support this participation and from the get-go as well, from the design stage and not just during implementation. We might really start to complexify here the hierarchies and binaries that we know so well when we are allowing for an intersectional lens during practical design. We might complexify what it means to have a numerical representation of only people identifying as men and women. The same thing with class or education, being transparent about where we stand on in terms of those different also intersections. And even in this vein of complexification, we might say, for this purpose, let's talk in a participatory way about what the different tracks of peace building are, for example. Imagine being able to complexify those as an intersection in itself while we go into conflict transformation processes and initiatives. So that was kind of talking about those complexifying processes in several ways. Yes, and then the next slide, please. Digital technologies can also allow us to ensure the true safety and security of people that are participating in our initiatives, or even people in our contexts whose opinion matters to us, so that we can frame a real understanding of our environment. So digital means can identify intersectional concerns that kind of cut across both online and offline harassment or intimidation that's targeted. And peace builders can use different digital tools to carve out safe spaces, anonymous spaces, but also to kind of be in the background for people who are most vulnerable to protect or to elevate narratives, opinions, and online engagement that might have been invisible previously. And peace builders have access to some of the data that could also take them there. And we can talk about that in a bit. In general, we know that informal peace processes, higher ups are prioritized. And so we would want to have that intersectional lens so that we can take into consideration the different intersections that would allow for the visibility and participation for certain people. Sometimes this can look like safety and security and participation. For some can look like having certain outlets for emotional distress or anxiety reduction during a project activity, but it can also be something like an interpreter or a translator or someone who actually makes us feel safe because the language that we speak, whether that's a sign language or an actual language that's not spoken, or another language that's not spoken by others, these can actually be safety practices depending on the context and the initiative at hand. And then in general, I would say that digital technologies make organizing easier. We know they provide the platform and the tools for people to actually talk in ways and organize in ways that they have not been able to before. And that peace builders, whether within those circles or not, have been able to have an interplay with activists and certain forms of activism that emerge through digital organizing. And at times they emerge precisely to interrupt and equalize offline power dynamics. So social media, for example, as we know it, can build larger constituencies of peace activists, people who can have different networks of intersectional allyship. And it can have this allyship happen in parallel with conversations about possible difficulties within those conversations as well. So this goes back to how the digital technologies can also breed trust in this way, to create the different moving parts of those conversations happening in parallel. This, again, is not always something that we can imagine happening in the offline space. So can I have the next slide, please? And now that we've talked about how the digital technology can be used through this intersectional, or how this intersectional lens can be used to push forward or ensure certain practices that improve our programming, improve our practice as peace builders, we can also talk about our practice as peace builders and how that helps us mitigate technology's harms. So knowing this intersectional approach and lens that we're taking, what are the paths that we can take to continue on that? The practical questions here are, how can the design and implementation of peace building programming include challenging the reinforcement of existing inequalities and the marginalization of vulnerable groups by digital technologies? Of course, the paper goes into much more detail about these and also outlines much more practical recommendations, but this will be an overview and hopefully we can speak more in the Q&A as well. So next slide, please. We believe the 4 priorities that digital peace builders should take into consideration when we talk about which harms we can mitigate. The first that we can do is rectify biased data collection. And of course, I'm saying these as ends and hopeful outcomes, but of course, they're very complicated and caveat-filled processes that really go down to how each actor, individual, etc., group navigates these, this implementation, and of course, their subsequent context. So rectifying biased data collection, what does this mean? Peace builders here can challenge and they can correct the identity-based biases that show up in digital data collection. We cannot, and we can rarely guarantee that data collection is done in a way that takes into consideration people who are outside certain binaries. We cannot always trust who and how data is being collected. And this is something we need to constantly examine and challenge. Peace builders can kind of zoom in on this more to alleviate that harm potentially. And our interpersonal practice can allow us also to elevate emotions and incorporate this into how we look at an otherwise data set that's biased in other ways, right? So the emotional dimension of this actually is not something that we need to be scared of as a bias. It's something that we sometimes need to incorporate to have a more clear understanding of data sets that we come across. We can also change the way that data is being collected. Projects like Everyday Peace Indicators literally did this from the ground up by people just talking about what they believe peace is for them. In other ways, we can also disrupt what an AI generated a machine learning process can give us. We can complexify this and question it because we as peace builders have access to certain tools. Build Up recently did this with our in-house tool, Phoenix, and it allowed us to really understand the difference between a more formal or formalized data collection process and one that happens in a participatory way. What can come out of that? how valuable is the process as well, not just the outcomes of it. And confronting access discrimination. So the choice of the technology that we use means that we can be much more scrutinous as peace builders because we can already go where people have access. We can meet people where they are because of the nature of the initiatives that we do and that we want to do. And in this way, we can overcome barriers. We can provide different options for accessing a technology. We can take into account the different layers of discrimination that are there. And we can use already frequently used tools, since we have trust and safety as a priority. Things like WhatsApp, etc., that don't need a lot of money or resources to run, can be a way for people who don't usually have access to certain conversations to be present, and not only present, lead in them and control. We have a privilege as peace builders, actually, to offer digital literacy as well, alongside many of the initiatives and activities that we would do otherwise. This can be a head-on way to confront marginalization. And we know at Build Up, us and lots of our colleagues in the field have many very kind of rewarding and interesting combinations of the tools that can enhance digital literacy and the initiatives that happen in parallel that are very much led by those actors themselves. And then just two more. I know I'm getting close to my time. So the last of our 4 priorities. So the third would be countering online vulnerability. This is our responsibility as well, so that, you know, if we're going to complexify peace and peace building as concepts and talk about a peaceful society being one where people can thrive, that also applies to the online space. That also applies to the vulnerabilities that people might be facing online. So accountability mechanisms, effective practice strategies against surveillance, against government retaliation, these all have a proper potential to remedy some of the vulnerabilities that we see, especially the layered ones that are present in digital spaces. We can use things like very practical tools. On WhatsApp in Yemen, we scheduled our WhatsApp consultations at staggered different evening times to guarantee women's participation, for example. We can disrupt this kind of, the time-specific vulnerability that goes towards women of different intersections and their potential participation. We've seen other things too, like getting people in a campaign to check into certain locations in hundreds, so that we have power in numbers and hide from the police the actual citizens who were put at the most risk by this police visibility. So digital tools will give us, you know, for whatever reason, it's a double-edged sword, but it gives us this access to say, I'm checking into this place, and almost in solidarity with this person, hiding them from police visibility, and therefore countering their online vulnerability. We also have programs that can train people to be cyber guardians in other senses, or ambassadors from offline contexts to online ones, like community leaders we've worked with in Yemen, who relay the offline concerns of women who don't have a lot of online access, but who want to become part of the online space. We have these informal conversations to understand what those challenges are, and it's usually very effective. And the last is the priority would be to dampen explicit attempts to harm. Our peace-building approaches can be used to intervene in digital spaces where we know marginalization happens, confronting the harm head-on, using trained cohorts of facilitators, people who understand concepts of rehumanizing relationships online, maintaining a healthy, engaged, non-polarizing conversation without submitting to lots of combative norms and some of the harmful practices that we see. We know a group like this in Iraq called Satyagraha, who does amazing work, and whose work also kind of started from discrimination against women and gender non-conforming and LGBT individuals in Iraq. So we know that digital peace-building methods can be used to actually correct the perceptions that were distorted by these structural concerns that we have, the structural concerns that brought us to a place where these intersections are even taken into account. And we know also that there is a parallel risk with artificial intelligence or algorithms dictating what we see online and pushing us more towards engaging with or being exposed to hateful content. So we know that us as peace builders can dig into data qualitatively in a way that can hopefully give us potential tools to overcome this, especially in ways that are not directly apparent through the more sophisticated tools that we sometimes use in our projects. I will close with that, although I know it was a lot. It's a thank you questions for sure. And I hope to continue the discussion with all of you and the panelists. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mira. And it's my time to say hello to you out there. We have come a long way since the days when we were simply chuffed that we could come together from the various places of the globe to really have these kinds of conversations. My name is Beatrix Austin. I will moderate our panel discussion with which we really want to tackle the main question. So what now? After this attempt to research and map out the possibilities and the I think sort of the force for justice that marrying an intersectional feminist perspective with digital peace building can have, we want to really go to a different set of places where our panelists do work with lots of diverse groups in places where lots of intersections already interact. At Berker Foundation, where I head the Conflict Transformation Research Department, we've had sort of the joy to bring together a sort of coalition almost already with Build Up, the platform, who are both network and collective organizations to think about these kinds of questions. And with that curiosity in mind, I'll take you on a conversational approach to the question of, so what do we do now with this mapping, the paths and the priorities that Mira has kindly laid out for us, building on the study. And we want to hear from different parts of the globe where this study and the mapping actually connect to the work that is being done. For this conversation, I welcome again Harriet, Nadine, and Jennifer. Rather than reading their impressive bios, I'll rely on my colleagues in the background who will post them in the chat. But let me say this much. Harriet is the Executive Director of the Foundation for Integrated Rural Development, Uganda, and she comes with a strong background in both very practice-orientated work, but also research and I think a strong policy mind. I welcome Nadine Alidib, Regional Musawat Project Lead and Coordinator, Pax for Peace, who will reflect a lot on the MENA region. And I welcome Jennifer Menninger, who's Managing Director of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom here in Germany. So we're trying to connect to practice and what this really can mean. All of our panelists have been given the challenging task to first share some reflections in 5-6 minutes only. And their reflections will center around sort of based on their experience and the context in which they work. How do the findings of the report, how do the paths and the priorities actually connect or have an ability to affect your work? What difference can digital interventions make if they are truly intersectional? And how do you work taking these things into account in places where lots of intersectionalities already exist? After the short inputs by our panelists, and Harriet, you're going to go first. On my screen, we're actually going to go from left to right 2 times. We'll then just enter into a sort of short round of joint reflections. What do we pick up from each other, from the different places in which we work, from the different sort of angles that we can take into this work before opening to a select amount of sort of questions which we want to then focus on in greater detail. Harriet, without further ado, it's over to you. And thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, everybody, my panelists, fellow panelists, and the entire globe that is joining us in this conversation. As I've been introduced, been doing this work for pretty a long time. As you all know, Uganda is a post-conflict community, and that is where I come from. And so my work has been around empowering communities off the globe or off the internet without digital technology. So most of our work has been around the offline work. But it is not until a couple of years ago that peace building started transitioning. And as an organization, we started embracing different technologies to also see how to empower the women and the girls in the communities where we are in post-conflict. And we work together to build our communities, both online and offline. So for us, it's not been a very easy journey in peace building, but also empowering the communities to embrace digital technologies, because it was a very new agenda, a very new narrative. So even building communities' mindset to say we can take this work that we're doing into a different space was not very easy. And as time moved on, and we've been able to embrace a couple of things to ensure that even if the communities are in the rural, they also understand why digital technologies are very important in building peace in our communities. And so we've done a lot of work around digital training and skills building. Of recent, we've started a lot of work around digital security because of the concept that we're in and the spaces where we're in. As you all know, the challenges that Uganda is having, especially for peace builders, to help different women and girls, different people in their diversity to do the work that we're supposed to be doing online. So it's not very easy to break those barricades, but as an organization, in partnership with different organizations, we're really trying to do our best to create that space where everybody can engage in conversations online and build a Uganda that is peaceful, which is inclusive as well. So digital technology is one of the aspects that we're working on. The other thing that we're picking on as an organization is to create a space we call the Safe Sisters program, where we have different women in different diversities coming together to learn from each other on how to create safe spaces online for various women peace builders in their own diversity. So this is a space that is supported by an organization known as Safe Sisters. So they've built our capacity, but we also shared the capacity or the knowledge we've gained with other sisters in different spaces to ensure that everybody is knowledgeable about their rights, is knowledgeable about their safety online, and then how they're using these digital technologies in their various peace building work. As an organization, we're also trying to create a community digital training center, which is going to be able to bring different people, build capacities, and make sure we have peace builders having access to technology tools, but also have a space where their skills and knowledge is enhanced. So it's the first of its kind that we're setting up to ensure that as a rural community, we bridge that digital gap between the urban and the rural communities in Uganda as we engage in the peace building work. Yes. Thank you. Over to you, Beatrice.
Thank you so much. I can't resist asking one very quick follow-on question, because you've been excellent in your time management. And that is, if you had to say in one or two sentences, what the difference is in engaging digitally with rural communities versus city communities, what would you say it is?
The first thing I would say is the knowledge and skills. You find that the communities in the city, people are they're literate, if I could say. So that's a big challenge, but also the infrastructure. There's a very big difference in infrastructure between the rurals and the urban cities. which makes it very hard. Even right now, I had to make sure I get somewhere that has very good internet to be able to speak to you, because if there are certain places that you cannot just sit and engage in conversations. So the infrastructure system is also not very good, but also the aspect around the policy in terms of security. So you find that as the rural peace builders, we don't know much about these policies. So that also affects how the rural communities and the city-based peace builders also work online. But also even having access to these digital tools, right? Mm-hmm. Most of the rural peace builders don't have these accesses. So they don't have access, the adaptability is a problem. So there's still a huge challenge between that infrastructure difference of the rural and the urban cities. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Harriet. I think that is incredibly helpful also for us to really picture the differences. And I think one of the first tasks in becoming more intersectional is really to be able to imagine different routes that people take with very different profiles, privilege, to be able to partake in what we have. With that, I would like to pass on to Nadine. Nadine, welcome also to you. And I would invite you around the same set of questions to take us to your work. And in your work in the MENA region broadly, but also quite sort of locally grounded, where do the findings of the report connect? How do they relate to your work? Where have they got a possibility to affect your work? And the other two sort of follow-on questions, if you want. So have you seen digital interventions that really already manage to be powerfully intersectional? What sets them apart? And how do you engage in a community that has lots of intersectionality woven into its fabric?
First of all, I'm gonna start with thanking the organizers and just adding that mainly my work with PACS has been recent, and I'm Lebanese and I live in Lebanon, and I have been working in the field of humanitarian and later on in development for a couple of years. So what I'm gonna share is mainly what is a reflection in my opinion from my limited, of course, experience. There's one thing that I want to start with is that when we talk about peace building and technology, this is a big intersection between humanitarian aid work and development work. You know, it's an important intersection. And in the work of the humanitarian and aid work, there's a lot of urgency and there's a lot of like, you're trying to control the damage, and by which a lot of different points have emerged, which is like gender sensitivity, do no harm, participatory approach, bottom top. So all of that it also reflects our need for intersectionality, you know? And then it's a bit overwhelming when every time you want to enhance programming and design, it is needed, but then I feel overwhelmed when I need to consider all the intersections that I really need to consider. And I think we really need to put more effort and to build more of ownership with the community so we can understand better, and then we can design and implement programs that could shift or accumulate towards the change that we have been aiming for. In my recent work, I would focus more, or mainly I'm gonna give two examples about what I observed in Iraq and working with youth from the West Bank. However, I can more relate to Lebanon. Of course, I live and I'm in Lebanon and I'm Lebanese, so I feel more comfortable doing that. One of the things that I came across when I was I'm still working on the FORB-related project implemented in Iraq and West Bank and Lebanon, in Palestine, naming the West Bank. I saw in our work, there's a bit of, we give privileges for when we want to work with minorities because they are the target. So they have this easy access to the program because they're from minority group. So we're giving a certain kind of like, accessibility, but then on a daily basis, they are facing gender discrimination, class discrimination from the system, from a patriarchal state and society. And sometimes it's very important for us to see those intersections and then, reflect on how to enhance our design and our implementation and how to see all those vulnerabilities by which working with minorities, it doesn't mean only protection of minority rights. It's beyond that. It's under the whole human rights, So also this I can also bridge it to when I also work with youth from the West Bank, from Palestine, and you can see on a big time the whole daily discrimination is coming on two different layers. First is that they are marginal, they are highly discriminated, attacked based on their ethnicity. And on another layer from the Hamas or different movements, you would find that they are also discriminated on gender or, class or political affiliation or whatever. And then those two kind of like bodies of oppression, we only focus with working with minorities when it's like the 2% of the Christians who are there, so, and then again, we are falling in the cracks, So this is how I can relate to those two experiences I had, and short experiences. I'm not an expert in Iraq or in Palestine. I mean, reflecting on Lebanon, then I would like to just segment how the civil society in Lebanon works. So in a way, like if you will segment it, you would find mainly we work on refugee rights, Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees, domestic workers, LGBTQ, secular movements. And all of these segments and projects and programs, they intersect on gender discrimination, on class discrimination, and ethnic national discrimination. And if you would just see the common point, it's in Lebanon, it's the absence of a social protection system, where everyone have this like they suffer from it. And then if we want to further reflect, it's mainly the confessionist state that Lebanon is, what Lebanon is about. So, and again, when Mira started in mentioning like how we need to use intersectionality to understand and enhance our programs, it's all important to see all of those intersections by which our programs are. We're not gonna become, we're not gonna be idealistic and and plateau about it, but at least this kind of like different crack that we can really seal in our work. I mean, one of the things that I think contributed and from my personal experience is working on the micro politics within the civil society, which means, as Harriet also was mentioning, safe spaces. I mean, safe spaces can lobby in a binary world. It can lobby in a very discriminatory world, and a classist world. So in a way, this is an actor that I can see the civil society and international, humanitarian actors can also focus on, because it gives ownership and it intersects with everyone when we call for a participatory approach. I'm not sure if I'm still with the time limit. Am I doing fine?
I was just sending you a gentle reminder to maybe slowly wrap up.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine. And thank you particularly also for bringing in the potential for being quite overwhelming that comes with the call for more intersectionality. And I think what sort of, to my mind, the report does, it really manages to break it down in some actionable paths and priorities, but it still is, I think, within all of our at least occasional feeling that it is also a new sort of breaking open of what we've learned to do to keep things manageable. And I think to relearn how to approach work pragmatically, but still intersectionally and with a view to greater justice is something that I really pick up from your intervention.
Yes, it's also like cause and effect, you know, this is what we also need to keep in mind. So thank you.
Excellent. And we'll give a quick round, a chance to all three of you to also pick up from each other's reflections. But for now, because I'm also noticing that we're a wee bit behind schedule, I'll pass on directly to Jennifer. Jennifer, you take us to a different setting again. For you and me, it's kind of the home base. And I believe very strongly that in pushing peace building forward, we also have to really focus on our own societies and the kind of work that needs to be done at home. So for us, it's bringing peace building or highlighting, elevating peace building also in Germany. Jennifer, I'm really curious what you take from the report, how it relates to your work in WILP, how you've already detected successful digital feminist intersectionalism, and what your reflections are on where this kind of work becomes actually palpable and we can grasp it. Floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to share my perspective. So my input will address the question how the findings of the report can relate and contribute to Germany's new feminist foreign and development policy. And I think it can strengthen the three main aims of the policy: rights, representation, and resources. But it can also deepen our conversation on intersectional feminism. So I will start with the relation to the three R's. First, rights. The authors suggest sharing the knowledge about the harms of digital technology, not only with their own networks, but also with policymakers and tech companies. They warn of possible negative impacts of digital peace building related to the safety and security of marginalized groups, and want to use their results to push for legal reforms in areas such as data rights, AI, and platform regulation. And there are already ongoing political processes in which these demands could be directly introduced. For example, the Women, Peace and Security agenda, but there was also the Commission on the Status of Women this year that was focusing on technology and innovation. And it is now up to governments such as Germany to implement the agreed conclusions. When we speak about representation, the authors stress the importance of human-centered design that includes marginalized groups in the design and testing of digital peace-building projects right from the start. So I think the report also suggests setting up different communication channels, for example, to reach more people from different backgrounds, and even moving a process offline when engaging marginalized groups online is simply not possible. So to stay flexible, as the report suggests, is very important in order to prioritize the safety and constraints of marginalized groups. So I think it's precisely this flexibility to involve more people that is still a big challenge also for state actors. When we speak about resources, the report recommends the need for an intersectional analysis as an integral part of each project, more funding flexibility to be able to react to unforeseen circumstances, and to provide opportunities for peace builders to get in touch with tech companies. I think this shows very well that there are other ways besides funding that donors can offer in order to reduce the power imbalance between them and peace builders. And now speaking about intersectionality, I think although the German government wants to implement the feminist foreign and development policy from an intersectional lens, it is still the case that the colonial past and its continuities are not really addressed. So I think like it is these structural changes, for example, in the trade, security or migration policy that are not initiated so far. The report, on the other hand, takes a more differentiated and self-critical approach. For example, the authors emphasize the need to start from a better understanding of privilege and discrimination. They acknowledge that building trust in colonial context is extremely difficult and that power imbalances are reinforced when local communities have to rely on the information and trust of non-local peace builders. They also raise awareness that white peace builders might demonstrate behaviors such as policing, respectability politics, or saviorism. So I think with a feminist intersectional lens, these dynamics become more visible and are easier to be addressed. So that's all from me now, and I'm looking forward to our further discussion.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, because again, you were great on timekeeping. Can I give you one quick follow-on question?
Sure.
And that is, would you say that there is a particular task that an organization like WILPF has the power to do with respect to working more at this intersection of feminism and digital policy? Is that something that shows up a lot in your work, or that where you'd say sort of this is something that we want to invest in or that we want to pursue forward?
Yeah, sure. So our organization has section and groups in more than 40 countries. And of course, a lot of our work now takes place online, but we face a lot of challenges. I mean, in Germany, it is not so much the case, but in other contexts, especially where there are ongoing conflicts, it is really difficult, and you have to think about a lot about the safety and also about safe opportunities even to communicate and not to put people more in danger. So I think we started a lot also to have procedures, more awareness training about how to behave online that is not putting people in danger, but also how to address it. And I think this is still very challenging also if you are living in a state that is also suppressing civil society and even like, making the situation, more difficult on the ground. So I think what we try to do is especially also to work in international fora like the United Nations, but also others where we can still address these issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I would like to open just for a few minutes the floor, the conversation to the three of us, the four of us, Mira, and see whether you would like to pick up anything from what you've heard from your colleagues around the globe, Harriet, as you've called it, and it truly is. Have you heard any opportunities, any challenges? Do you relate to any commonalities among this? And while there is some space for all of us to share these kinds of reflections, I hope that you out there who have joined us for the launch will give us a few more of your questions or reflections in the chat. Please use the Q&A function. And after our round here, I'll ask my colleague Nina, who has also quite held this study together at the center between the different partners, to bring us some of the selected questions to reflect before I send you all off into the rest of your Thursday afternoon or of your Wednesday afternoon or evening. See, I've slightly fallen out of time here. So the floor is yours amongst the panelists, and Mira, you as the holder of the study insights, what have you picked up from each other?
Thanks, Beatrix. I think I could just start by saying it was really enlightening to hear the different kind of like touch points where everybody thought that this fell into place for them. I think in the report, as I said in the beginning, we really tried to offer a lot of space in the report itself for the practical recommendations, which I think are the common thread between what everybody said. I think Jennifer's intervention really brought in everything as I don't want to say symptoms because it makes it look like it's just a problem. It's more than just a problem. But I think both Harriet and Nadine brought in the practical hurdles that are there, whether it's about when we talk about digital technologies, are we already excluding someone? When we talk about all of these tools, is there something at the base that we need to be doing to ensure that it's not tone deaf to talk about them as positive tools to begin with? And that really depends on the context that we're coming into. And when I say coming into, I think that also touches a lot on what Jennifer said about understanding the context and being aware. We expect digital literacy from everybody who steps into or wants to practice being in a digital space safely. And I think we owe it to each other as practitioners to understand, okay, what do we need to know about our contexts? What can we never assume to be able to do our work well? And this sometimes comes with simply stepping away. This sometimes comes with admitting that digital technologies are not well placed right now. And so we go into some of those details in the report more, and to bring in the kind of familiarity of Nadine's intervention, because we're both kind of closest to the Lebanese context. It's important to frame that there might be intersections that people literally don't understand or have a very like kind of nuanced exposure to. A donor coming in to speak or act in a conflict transformation process in Lebanon will really need to understand the intricacies of a confessional system. Just like this is expected, you know, in the different intersections that we find across, you know, any context, and I would even say any online context in that sense as well. So yeah, maybe that's just my first way of kind of threading things together, but I'm also happy to take any of the interventions that came in the Q&A chat.
Excellent. Harriet, Nadine, Jennifer, do you have anything that you want to pick out of the different reflections that resonated with you, that you thought, oh, I can relate to that, or that's completely different in where we are working?
Thank you, Mira. I want to pick from where Mira has said, and also just to add on what you said, when you look at this technology transition, it's pretty so new for most of the developing countries, if I could say. So you find that people are struggling in how to adapt these technologies because, well, and now to make it worse, COVID-19 affected countries, right? And everybody's trying to go online. But the truth is, not everybody's ready to go online. And that is something nobody's looking at. We think everybody should adapt to what is happening now. All of us should go online because it is online. And we shouldn't forget that the context of our rural communities, for example, they're not yet ready to go into that space. So how do we bridge this and build the relationship between the online and offline peace building processes, because those two still have to work together, and we shouldn't forget the other and pick on the other because the whole world is moving into digital technology. Yes, it is there, we need it, but then how do we transition in a way that we don't leave anyone behind? We bring everybody into that space and find them in their own space where they are and pick them up to join the conversation of embracing digital technology for peace building. So for me, I think that's very, very important, but also not forgetting the fact that, for example, in Uganda right now, we're struggling with this new policy on challenging the narrative around safety for the LGBTQI community. But we also know the community needs to be heard, right? They're supposed to be part of the process of building this country peacefully, because before we look at their agenda, right? They're human beings and their voices matter, but these spaces are being closed as well. And the LGBTI community cannot even speak on issues that are affecting them. So how do we create that space, even in the digital world? People's They're clumping our spaces in terms of your Twitter accounts, your Facebook accounts. Literally, if you're online and you're an activist, an advocate, a peace builder on issues around LGBTQI rights, they're going to shut you down. And everybody now is scared. How do I engage online and voice out issues that affect the community? Because they need to be heard, right? Look at the refugees. The refugees are not being given a space to share things that are affecting them. We know refugees are so many in Uganda, and we need to create spaces where their voices can be heard as well. We are having cases around refugee host-community conflicts. And some of this conflict is not being heard because it is in the deep rural communities. But then they cannot even bring it online. They cannot use the digital technologies to voice out the conflict that is going on between the host communities and the refugee communities. Why? That space has been closed off for them. You know, and because of your safety, you cannot just open your mouth and shout and, you know, use the space that you say you're using. Why? Even as we talk, right now, there's so many, we have the National Cybersecurity Strategy, but if you look at that strategy, it doesn't protect us, right? It doesn't protect us. You think it's supposed to be protecting you, but it's not. So for me, I think this report speaks so much in terms of how we can address these intersectional dynamics or differences or inequalities that we're seeing. And if everybody can pick up on this report and actually read it, maybe everybody will understand where we're coming from, why we're saying if we're engaging in peace building, how do we bring in everybody, amplify the voices of the marginalized, create spaces that are safe for everyone, because conflict doesn't affect me because I am a woman, or because it affects everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. In your differences, in our intersectionality, it will affect us the way we are. And everybody has a role to play to bring peace in our different communities. So it doesn't matter that I'm a girl, I'm in the city. No, if I'm a girl in the rural community, it will affect me. If I'm a woman in the cities, it will affect me. If I'm a woman who is indigenous, I'm from the refugee community, as long as there is conflict, it will affect all of us. But all of us have a role to play to build peaceful communities. And how do we use that? We use the digital space to build solidarity. But that solidarity online must be very inclusive, because if it's not, then we shall leave other people out of the conversation on how to embrace digital technologies to build peace in our different communities. Yeah, over to you.
Harriet, thank you so much. Maybe Nadine, another challenge was just exemplified with you. You said there's another power cut in Beirut, and that is also part of the reality. If we want to have these conversations, on the one hand, so much as possible. On the other hand, we always have to be mindful on how many different things there are to consider in order to make them work. So, and I think the intersectionality approach and the lens really helps us do that. Nina, I would love to bring you in at this stage because our time is running out. Dear audience, you will also have noticed that we've now posted the link to the report in the chat. We didn't want to give that to you right away so that you wouldn't at the same time sort of start to read and scroll through it, but I hope you will take it with you and read it. Nadine and Jennifer, you will have a chance to also share some other more reflections when we come back to you with a final round. But Nina, could you just give us a couple of highlight questions from the Q&A, and then we'll use that as a last round amongst our panel to engage and reflect on those. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. The questions are mainly directed to Mira, but maybe also the other participants have something to say to it. So the first question is around the risks and challenges. Could you also speak to the challenges such as fake news and even provocateurs in these challenges in social media? Can you speak about ways to mitigate or handle such challenges? That's the first question. And then the next question is goes in direction to the principles of data feminism, which we also touch upon in the report, which emphasize challenging power dynamics, honoring diverse knowledge systems, appreciating diverse experience, and emphasizing emotions embodiment. How can we effectively apply such principles to intersectional digital peace building? And then there's a more like a monitoring and evaluation question. Given the four approaches to intersectional peace building you have outlined in your report, could you discuss some concrete strategies and methodologies for measuring and evaluating the effectiveness of intersectional digital peace building initiatives in these domains? How do we ensure that our metrics success align with intersectionality? And the last question, there's a need for decolonial, critical, emancipatory, intersectional peace-building approaches rooted in the lived experience of people to reclaim human agencies. And I also shared another kind of resources in the chat from participants. You can see it in the chat. So over to you again.
Thanks, Nina. I will kind of quickly tackle some of these if that's okay. But I've really also kind of, I'm eager to hear about practical things, especially about like M&E and measurement, also from my colleagues, if that's something that comes to mind in particular, because the rest are really report-focused questions. That's why I'm making this distinction. But to begin, I mean, I think usually, so we say in the report, this is a hopeful paper because we spend so much time usually in our work and outside of build-up talking about the caveats, the challenges, and the kind of other face of technology in that sense. So many of our findings and recommendations actually come from years with struggling in defining or moving away from defining technology as a neutral tool or social media as a neutral platform where we can just share and collectively exist and have a microcosm of a great utopia online that kind of erases our most feared challenges. Actually, it's very much the opposite. And everything from fake news to disinformation not only puts us at risk in the online environment, but it also very provenly so affects people who are already marginalized in similar ways online as well. An Ethiopian colleague, Dr. Tigist Hussein, gave a talk not so long ago, and I will never stop paraphrasing the sentence from her of talking about when we talk about discrimination online, we're still talking about bodies. We're still talking about the body of a person who is being affected by this, whatever it is, oppression, a harmful practice, cyberbullying, or even just the existence of someone from their profile name online can bring about that a potentially harmful practice. And so, of course, there's a risk of those interactions being insincere. And I think what we tried to do in the report was just see how those can start to be mitigated when we change the frame that we're coming into programming with. And then, I mean, me and I'm sure everyone here and my build-up colleagues will always be ready to discuss the dimensions of technology tooling us and how we can navigate that. I think that's a huge kind of suite of things to add. And then I wanted to also just tackle the principles of data feminism, or should we do a round and see if people have stuff to add on this one?
I would love if we could do that because we've got about 6 minutes left now. So let's try and cycle through it quickly and briskly and treat this as the hopeful start of a conversation that is by no means finished. Nadine, could I pass over to you next? Because we have you, and while we have you, and the power works.
Yes, I mean, I was just, being sometimes sarcastic. So I was saying to myself, like, yeah, I fall again in the crack of an absent state in Lebanon. So basically, I don't have a lot to add. It's just like for me, when it came to my mind when I was going through the report, and to be honest, it's something that I was happy to find myself also learning about, further about this kind of like, because, we think about intersections, but sometimes we don't frame it in a way that, we embody it in our work. But there's something that I mean, while I was preparing yesterday and I'm reading the report, I was thinking about how can we in our work, in the domain of our work, we can think about resources, because most of our issues is we're dealing with oppression, with systematic and structural oppression from the state or different group and so on. And all of that, they are directly related to how resources are even like, hold on, the relationship between resources and power and the oppressive and so on. So in my kind of like analysis, it's important for us in this field of like, humanitarian development, is that we reconsider also how we see resources and redistribution of wealth, and how can we actually, bring this, because this can big time, reduce discrimination, and I don't know how would that be more thoughtful, and how it could be, but also this can give more ownership when we're working with communities.
Thank you, Nadine. Jennifer, Harriet, would any of you want to share more sort of a final reflection, picking up on some of the questions, maybe also picking up on the question of how will we evaluate, how will we know that this has an impact and the impact that we're hoping for?
I can start maybe. Well, in general, I think the discussion shows very well how the offline and the online world is connected, and that we cannot manage it or like build peace separately from these two spaces. And I think in general, a lot of the problems that we see happening online are there because they are offline there. So I think many problems that we have to solve are actually not being solved online, but we have to think about, okay, what are the social issues or the political issues or other resources, conflicts that are happening, and how then does it play out offline as well. So I think this is something we have to keep in mind, and this might be also something that we have to then evaluate. Is it making an impact then also on the offline world, and does it actually create a more just society, and has more impact than also marginalized groups? Definitely. And I mean, it's always like it's said, like it's something for everyone, but I think this report also outlines that we really have to put them now into focus and really give them the power. And that's also the ownership of the community. I think if we want to evaluate it, we really have to ask ourselves, is it now the case that they have the ownership and are leading the process?
Thank you very much. Harriet, the last word is yours before we come to a quick collective takeaway session with a Mentimeter exercise.
Thank you. And also the report is very concrete, and it gives us very valid recommendations. And so I think it's upon us who develop these initiatives of peace building programs to go back to the community and engage with them, just like the report recommends, and ask them, do we think this is working out or it's not working out? If it's not working out, then how do we work together to develop tools that are actually working? We've had that experience where we have these digital tools that they come to do researches with the communities, and communities don't even understand the tools, right? Because they're developed from another place, and then they're pushed onto this place to get information from communities. So, but if we develop tools that are actually very inclusive, and communities have the power and voice, and they own those tools, then they'll be able to tell us this works and this doesn't work in our context. But if we did it this way, then it would be able to help in the peace building processes. So I think it goes back to us as well as peace builders or program developers. How do we ensure that we include everyone from the onset as we think about these interventions, the implementation, and even the evaluation process, so that it's not just a one-off and we forget it is a cycle, to ensure that that helps us to assess and adapt digital technologies that actually will work in context of every communities that we're working in. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now, the beauty of being online is that at the end of this session and this launch, we can tap into a little bit of what you are taking away, what sticks with you who have been listening to this, who might have already read the report, who are curious to read the report after this. And for this, some of you might be familiar with it. My colleagues are going to post a link to something that's called a Mentimeter. It allows you to enter a word or a short phrase. And what we would like to ask you is, what is your key takeaway from this discussion as it centers around the hopefulness, the challenges, the path forward for an intersectional feminist take on digital peace building? So what is your key takeaway from this discussion? In the chat, you see, please use the Mentimeter link. You can either use a telephone, a mobile phone, or your laptop. Just click on it. It sends you to a mask that you can use to just add in your one takeaway. And the magicians in the back will just collect these briefly, and then we can see a word cloud that will give us the round out for this session. Nina, you give me a signal when you think you've got sort of a sufficient number of responses.
I already shared it. I think it can just grow. Just keep on typing.
Excellent.
In.
As it keeps growing, I will do just a very brief wrap up, which is not going to do justice to the wide-ranging discussion or the well-structured report, but I'll tell you what I take away from it. I think I take away from it again, like at a recent conference, which was called Peace Digital, and where some of us have also met and deliberated together, that in a way, digital peace building or the digital technologies are simply peace building with a broader repertoire and with approaches and tools that allow us to do things that we weren't able to do before. They bring their own challenges, but they also bring opportunities to actually work for greater justice. And I think some of the key words that I noted down here is how important, as we are looking at this through an intersectional feminist lens, it is to keep creating safe spaces, to focus on justice, to make sure that human beings, no matter what their identity compositions are, can feel that their voices matter in creating the communities that they live in, and that the voices that we can hear are safe to express themselves and have access and understanding of the areas in which they can express themselves. I think my take on the MEL question would be that good MEL always also starts with a design. So a design has to actually then also really take an intersectional approach from the start. And the word cloud centers quite firmly participation and safe and inclusive space in its center, many other things as well, but with the possibility of using both intersectionality and digital tools to create better participation. I will leave you. I hope you have enjoyed the discussion. I say a big thank you to the spotlighted contributors, to you, Mira, and your team at Build Up for working through and wrangling with the material to make it practical and to make it to sort it into something that we can relate to quite well. Harriet, Jennifer, Nadine, to you for relating it to your practice, the audience out there, and of course the team at the platform, at Berkov and at Build Up who are working in the background. We will come out with a graphic recording of this discussion, and we hope that we will be able to use this visual summary to continue talking about it and to continue relating it, whether it is to our grounded practice or to our policy engagement. Good afternoon.